Hello and welcome to Faster Application Iteration with AWS Amplify CI/CD. My name is Nader Dabbit. I'm a Senior Developer Advocate on the AWS Mobile and Amplify teams, and I'm going to be presenting today with Suman Kang, the Associate Director of Engineering at Noom. Today, I'll be going over an introduction to AWS Amplify, and then I will deep dive on CI and CD, managing users and data, as well as advanced app settings and management. I'll then introduce Suman Kang from Noom, who will walk through how they use Amplify at their company. So let's first talk about what AWS Amplify is. AWS Amplify is a set of tools and services that can be used together or on their own to build web and mobile applications that scale to full stack, powered by AWS applications that are used in a variety of use cases. With Amplify, you can configure cloud backends and connect them to your app in minutes. Deploy static websites and backends in a few clicks and easily manage app content outside the AWS console. Amplify integrates with web frameworks and platforms like React, Angular, Vue, and Next.js, as well as mobile platforms like native Android and iOS, React Native, Ionic, and Flutter. You can then use the Amplify admin UI and CLI's intuitive workflows to set up scalable AWS backends with authentication, storage, data, and other common use cases. You can connect your app to new or existing cloud resources with your front-end framework using Amplify libraries and just a few lines of code. To deploy your app, you can then use the Amplify console to host static sites or single-page web apps with a Git-based workflow simply by connecting your app's repository. You can use the new Amplify admin UI, which we'll be going over today, to provide your team with administrative access to manage users, data, and app content without an AWS account. So let's first talk about the two main parts of AWS Amplify. They're kind of broken up into the Amplify framework, which is open source, and the Amplify console, which is a service. And we're going to be focusing mainly on the Amplify console today, but we will be talking about the framework as well. So we're going to briefly give an overview of the Amplify framework. The Amplify framework is made up of two main parts. There's the Amplify CLI, and then there's the Amplify client libraries. Using the CLI, you'll basically use this to create, integrate, and manage the AWS cloud services for your app. So it's kind of like a command line interface that you'll install globally on your computer. The CLI also manages project environments, does GraphQL, Lambda, and data store code generation, and integrates with the Amplify console and admin UI, as we're going to demonstrate later on. Once your backend services have been deployed using the CLI, you can then use the Amplify client libraries to interact and connect to your AWS APIs and services from your front-end web and mobile apps. And Amplify, like I mentioned earlier, currently supports libraries for native iOS and Android, Flutter, React Native, as well as JavaScript and web frameworks like Vue, Next.js, React, Angular, and Ionic, as well as providing UI components for many of those frameworks. But we're going to be mainly focusing on the AWS Amplify console, so let's take a look at the Amplify console. You can think of the Amplify console as the control center for your Amplify app. And as of now, with the new launch of the Amplify admin during reInvent, it's broken up into two main parts, the Amplify hosting service and the new Amplify admin. So we're going to first now take a deep dive into Amplify hosting. Amplify hosting provides a simple CI/CD workflow for building and deploying web apps. Simply connect your application's code repository in the console, and changes to your front-end and back-end code are deployed in a single workflow on every code commit. With Amplify hosting, you can deploy single-page apps built with frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, and Ember, as well as static sites generated with frameworks like Next.js, Eleventy, Gatsby, Hugo, and Jekyll. You can also host websites without connecting to a Git provider with a manual deploy by choosing a drag-and-drop folder from your desktop or referencing Amazon S3 bucket, Dropbox folder, or external URL. So there's a few techniques, like I mentioned, that you can deploy your sites with Amplify hosting, but we're going to be focusing on two today. We're going to be looking at the Amplify console as well as the Amplify CLI, and we'll start with the Amplify console. When you create a new app, Amplify will prompt you for your repository location, letting you choose between a Git provider or external code location. Once you've chosen where your code lives, you'll then choose your repo and your branch. So in this example, we have a branch named main, and we have a repo called Amplify CI/CD. And once we choose our settings there, we can go ahead and go to the next step, which will give us complete control over our build settings to configure our cache settings, our output directory, and our build commands. And then that's it. Once we're done with those configurations, the deployment will begin. And once the deployment is complete, you can see a quick overview of the build as well as a link to your lab app directly from the Amplify console. Headless Chrome will also test and create screenshots of your app across different devices, giving you an idea of how your app will look on various screen sizes. And then once the app is launched, you can iterate and deploy new features by committing code and merging into the branch that's being deployed. Once the code is merged, the service will kick off a new build automatically, and the deployment will be completed using an atomic deployment. And the console will basically run back through the provisioning process and deploy an atomic update on the build success. Deployment URLs will be prepended with the branch name, enabling you to work on new features without impacting production, and also create branch deployments linked to each feature branch. So in this example, we have a docs branch that we've created, and we can now have a subdomain that's automatically created for us based on the branch name. You can also create and manage backends now using the Amplify console with the new release of the Amplify admin UI. So mainly we've been looking kind of so far at the beginning of this at the front end, but we're now going to take a look at the back end. And if you haven't yet created a backend environment, you can do so using, like I mentioned, the new Amplify admin UI, which we're going to take a look at now. Once you click on backend environments, if there is no backend environment there yet, you can click Get Started to kind of walk through the setup of a new backend. The admin UI will walk you through enabling authentication as well as your data layer. And you can do things like configuring your data model itself, along with relationships and authorization rules, as well as authorization configuration. So you can set up things like public access, private access, or fine-grained access control. Next, you'll be walked through the optional steps of configuring your web or mobile app locally using the new backend. So this kind of gives you a walkthrough of all of the steps that you would need to pull down the code and run the app locally. And this is all done before the deployment is even completed, because we kind of offer a local testing environment using the APIs that Amplify admin UI is going to deploy and create for you using Amplify Data Store. And once the services are deployed, you can use the Amplify admin panel to continue iterating and updating your backend. So here we see we have the option to manage the content within the deployment, and we also have the option to kind of deploy new services that have yet to be added to the app. For example, let's say we wanted to add authentication. We can do so directly from the admin UI, configuring everything from sign-in and sign-up mechanisms to OAuth providers like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and OIDC. Once the authentication is created, you can manage users and groups directly from that same interface. So here we might want to go in and create new users. We might want to add users to a group or even create new groups. We can kind of do all of that directly from this new admin UI interface. And then from there, you can also continue iterating on your app by iterating on your data model itself from the admin UI. You can add new data types. You can update your current model relationships and authorization rules. And then once you've made those updates, you can deploy those updates directly from the admin UI. And then once the backend is deployed using the Amplify console, you can also see it available under your backend environments in the Amplify console. And then in the Amplify console, you can kind of get a good overview of all the different services that are available, but also all the services that have currently been deployed in your app. So here you can see that we have an app, and we've deployed authentication, file storage, functions, and an API. But from there, you kind of may want to continue iterating and adding features that are not yet available in the UI or the console itself. Or you maybe want to have other developers collaborate on the app and test it locally or within the client. You can do that using the CLI. So like I had shown earlier in this slide, you can kind of pull down your current environment using the CLI, and we give all of the different steps that are necessary to kind of get that up and running. And it looks something like this. You'll run amplify pull, passing in your app ID and the environment name. This will pull down all of the code locally and allow you to continue iterating. And then from there, you can even add additional environments and deploy copies of this infrastructure. So let's say you wanted to kind of come up with a new environment for creating some new feature. You can add that environment, deploy it, and once it's deployed, you can continue iterating and then merge the changes over into your main environment or whatever your production environment is. And you can do that by deploying using Amplify Push. And then the interesting thing is that after you've deployed your updates, you'll see that new backend environment in the Amplify console. And then from there, you can also open this up in the Amplify admin UI and continue iteration there. So this is kind of, we've gone over some brief overview, but let's take a deeper look at the available app settings as they relate to CI and CD, like we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, where we're going to be really diving a little deeper on. In the Amplify console, you'll be given a menu of options for managing your deployment. From here, we'll walk through some of these features. We'll start with PR previews. PR previews offer development and QA teams a way to preview changes from pull requests before merging code to a production or integration branch. After a pull request is open, you can discuss and review the potential changes with collaborators and follow-up commits before your changes are merged into the base branch. So here you can kind of see an overview of a new pull request that's been created, and you can click on the link, test it out, share it, and as you're going to see in a moment, we can also protect this deployment with password protection if this is something that you want only people within your org to see. You can also customize domains. So let's say you want to add a custom domain, which you probably do for most production applications. This is fairly simple to do. All you need to do is go into Route 53 and add your domain there. This will basically give you some DNS settings that you'll need to then set up in the DNS provider that you already have. From there, you will see the domain show up in the list after it's been added to Route 53. From there, you'll choose your domain, and then you can configure all the settings around that domain, including subdomains. So Amplify Console, like I mentioned earlier, will also automatically create subdomains for you on newly created branches. For example, if you wanted to have your dev branch, Amplify will automatically create dev.yourapp.com based on the name of the branch being dev. And then when you delete this branch or any branch, any associated subdomains are also automatically deleted for you. So a really good, interesting use case, kind of like I'm highlighting here, is a lot of people use this for docs management. So it's pretty nice because you don't really have to create a completely separate, repo and build settings and tools and all that around that. You just have your branch for docs, and then we automatically have our subdomain. Amplify Console also enables build notifications pretty simply. So for instance, you might want to have notifications on when a build succeeds or a build fails. Pretty simple to set up. You go into the options and you configure this, and you can have different settings based on different branches as well. And then finally, access control. So a lot of times you may want to set up access control based on a couple of different things. So for example, you might want to have access control on your branch or your updates, like features being created, but you want your main branch to be public. You can do that by kind of having fine-grained access control over the access control itself for the different branches. Or if you would like to, you can set even a global setting. So let's say you want to have like a new deployment for a new app or something like that. You could go ahead and set a global password across the entire app itself, meaning that anyone that views your app does need a username and password to kind of view that. So to learn more about a lot of the stuff that I kind of went over, I would check out these resources. First of all, the main Amplify website, which is aws.amazon.com/amplify/console. We also have a console overview at console.aws.amazon.com/amplify/home, or you can just Google Amplify Console. This is kind of where you can actually try the Amplify Console out within AWS dashboard. The AWS Amplify blog is a good place to kind of get updates about what we've released in the past, also tutorials and things like that. And then there are more resources at aws.amazon.com/amplify/resources. And that's it for me. So next thing I'm going to do now is hand this off to Suman Kang. Suman is the Associate Director of Engineering at Noom, and she's going to tell us about how they used Amplify Console at their company.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Suman, Associate Director of Engineering at Noom, as introduced. We're a healthcare tech company that uses psychology-based approach along with human coaches to help millions of people live healthier lives. I've been at Noom for 4.5 years, and currently I'm leading the growth engineering team. We've been using Amplify over the last 2 years or so, and we wanted to share how we achieved fast iteration via the Amplify console. First, I'd like to briefly describe the growth team at Noom. We're full-stack engineers who work on the Noom.com website, and our overarching mandate is to increase experiment velocity. The quicker we're able to experiment, the faster we learn. The faster we learn, the faster we can iterate and improve the site. Day to day, our engineers work closely with our product managers to build, measure, and learn from these experiments. We usually run them in the form of A/B tests, and in any given week, we might be running anywhere from 10 to 20 experiments. So, let me describe the problem we faced while trying to achieve this kind of fast iteration. Anyone who's had experience with any kind of experimentation will know of using feature flags or scattering if statements into the codebase. Consider the following stat. We know from experience that generally only 1 in 10 experiments succeed. That means that for every successful experiment, we had 9 experiments worth of unused features or dead code left behind in our codebase. What that means is iterating quickly becomes untenable because we have to spend the extra effort to clean up the codebase or work around the dead code. So to solve this problem, we sat down and brainstormed, and then we were able to come up with this novel idea. What if we could use Git to manage the different variations of our experiments? If you think about it, Git already works well for versioning code. So what if we're able to use the power of Git to simply show a user a different branch of code? So, how does that work? If you look at the following diagram in this slide, each circle represents a Git commit. Let's say the master tip in the picture represents the current baseline experience. This is basically the experience the user will get by default when they're not placed in any experiment. Each of the other circles then can represent a different variation or an experience that the user might see. When an engineer wants to create a new experiment variation, they simply create a new branch and make the changes they want directly into the code. What that means is no more if statements or feature flags. And then during build time, we can specify the list of Git commits or Git hashes that we want to make available as different experiment variations. So that when it comes down to the user, we're able to determine what experiment variation we want them to see and load that specific experience for them. So let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about what the system will actually look like. High level, in order to run experiments, we need the following 3 things. First, a way for non-technical product managers to start and stop experiments. Second, we need a way to combine and deploy our control and different variation codes for our experiments. And third, we need a way to place users into these different variations. So in practice, how does that look? It's actually quite simple. If you look at the right here, we have an example a simple JSON definition pictured. So each experiment basically has a name and a list of variations. For each variation, we also need to define the git commit hash, which actually represents the experience we want to put the user in. We also define how much percentage of our traffic we want to allocate to each variation. So going back to the JSON definition pictured on the right, this represents what an actual experiment definition might look like. And this is the definition that we pass into our build system, which then makes sure that all the different variations are built, deployed, and made available for the users to see. And this experiment definition then is also passed along to the front-end client, which is in charge of showing the specific variation the user should see depending on the targeting. So then we built an experiment orchestration system in order to assemble and configure the JSON that was described in the previous slide. Essentially, this system is just a small web app that our product managers could use to assemble or configure the experiment definition. The system will later be hooked up into our CI/CD system to trigger a rebuild of our client whenever our experiment definition changes. So, this is where Amplify Console comes in. And this is the most important piece and the main component of our experiment infrastructure. We decided to go with Amplify Console for several reasons. First, the continuous integration and continuous deployment system was super easy to set up and customize. It also integrated with GitHub super easily, and that was an additional benefit because we were already on it. Second, we were able to use the pull request preview feature. This allowed our engineers to quickly deploy changes, view it live, and it also made it easier to collaborate with product managers during development. Third, we also utilized webhooks to trigger builds from the orchestration system that I just described whenever the experiment definition changed. And last but not least, we wanted to spend as little time as possible managing our infrastructure so that we could devote that time into experimentation. And we were super happy to offload that responsibility to Amplify. And so this was the outcome after we implemented this system. We were able to run many more experiments with the same number of resources. In reality, we actually increased it about 50%. We also didn't have to worry about creating technical debt with every new experiment. The if statements, feature flags, that didn't worry us anymore. Each experiment is self-contained in their own branch, which basically leaves the baseline code clean and untouched. And finally, whenever we needed to merge in a winning experiment, this is what we call baselining an experiment, it would just be a pull request away. And that's it. This is how we achieve faster iteration with the help of Amplify. If you're interested in learning more about the system, feel free to check out our blog post in the Noom engineering medium as well. Thanks for listening. That's it.